I would like to thank you, everyone who is joining today's debate. The debate will focus on the upcoming Czech EU presidency, its priorities, especially towards the Western Balkan region, and in relation to the current events that have been happening in Ukraine. My name is Anja Grabovac. I am a project manager at Prague Security Studies Institute, and I will be today's moderator. Just a bit of background on the event itself. It is organized as a part of a project titled Western Balkans Futures under the auspice of the Visegrad Insight and with the support of International Visegrad Fund and National Endowment for Democracy. In relation to that, recently, the Western Balkans Scenario 2030 report has been released, published. It's a report which has been part of the project. It identifies 5 possible scenarios for the region, which can happen in the upcoming 8 years, basically by 2030. And today, the aim is also to kind of touch upon some of these variables or scenarios, for example, the integration between the Western Balkans and the EU or the possible EU integration. And you will be able to see or view later the scenario yourself. We will share the link in the chat window. And I would also like to encourage you to ask questions after each of the panelists will have a space. And you can do that either by writing a question in the chat or by raising your hand, and then you will actually be able to speak and ask the questions directly to the panelist. And finally, it is my pleasure to welcome our speakers. We have Josef Zrzavecký, who is an analyst of the foreign policy, the policy planning department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then we have Žiga Faktor, who is the head of Brussels office of the Institute for European Policy, also known as EUROPEUM. And finally, we have Petr Čermák, a Balkan expert, currently at the Faculty of Social Sciences, Charles University, and who is also a Kosovo Research and Analysis Fellow. And I believe also that we have a really nice combination of speakers, which provides a pretty unique perspective as we are able to combine, the official level perspectives, also looking at the kind of NGO sphere perspective, and finally mixing in also the academic sphere. So I'm really excited about what the discussions will take place. And last but not least, I will now give floor to Josef Zrzavecký. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you hear me. At the beginning, I have to make an apology because I will be beating around the bush, or I will be evasive of direct answers. Nothing is formally agreed yet, and with the events on Ukraine and the Russian aggression there, of course, there are some progress of reconsideration of the plans which were valid until 24th of February. So whatever I say, this is not an official position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have to underline this small disclaimer. It may disappoint you, but certainly not surprise you. On the other hand, I will be very happy to also listen to the opinion from the opposite side, from the civic society, NGOs, think tanks, and so, of course, this is all the time value. When I said that it is not an official position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I would say that with one exception. And it is that our hearts and minds are with Ukrainian people, with the civilian and military, and who are facing this disgusting aggression. And at the same time, we have to salute all volunteers and the contributors who are assisting to wave of refugees, particularly children and women. And it also includes the solidarity that is shown in the most of Western Balkan countries. And as Frenchmen are saying, chapeau. Of course, we may discuss at length what would be the success of our presidency, how it would be measured, and what would be the ideal, optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic scenarios for that. I don't think that this is the forum for today for that. From my point of view, the important is to look beyond the Czech presidency, not to focus only on these 6 months, but what is in total going on in the Western Balkan region. And the main objectives, therefore, should be to prepare Western Balkan countries for challenges and the responsibilities of the future which lies within the European Union. Certainly, we were never blind, and we not naive, and we know that the ingerence of Russia and the Western Balkan countries is multi-present even before this aggression. However, this aggression may open some eyes and may them make think whether they are not standing too much on the Russian side. If I say, I would say off record, the question mark there. So question is, like everything in the life, is the worst cases are coming sometimes with something which is positive. The question is whether this aggression against Ukraine would not incite some countries to reconsider their positions and to reflect that they are standing probably too much in some aspects of their policy on the side of Russia. But being at least a little bit concrete, even though I said at the beginning that I can't go into some details, certainly there are some intentions which in principle will not change. They might be maybe modified. And the Czech Republic during the presidency, and I'm speaking in the narrow sense towards the Western Balkans, would like to maximize effort to the progress in accession processes. In ideal scenario, certainly we may have the empty hands if French presidency will make a great effort. We would wish that it happens already. Otherwise, it would stay for our presidency to make progress in the relations towards Northern Macedonian and Albanian start of negotiation with some intergovernmental conferences and the progress in general with the accession negotiation of Montenegro and Serbia. And the third of such an axis would be the implementation of the new methodology of accession, which is the so-called enhanced accession. Sometimes some people are speaking about speedy integration, but I would personally prefer to avoid this expression. In parallel and from the different point of view, there are some sectoral activities of cooperation, and I see from the participants in the debate that there might be some complements to this issue, that these activities would focus on the preparedness of the accession partners in areas of the security, which is meant in the wider sense, not in this narrow one. Also in the area of democracy, rule of law, civil society, or economic and social development. And these areas that I mentioned now would be coupled or underlined with our attention that should be put into the failing process of reconciliation. If I go a little bit in some specifics, which I probably may a little bit comment because it is dealt with directly in our department, they are going around this notion of reconciliation quite intensively. We are preparing some events, but we of course know that the success of the presidency would not be measured by numerous conferences or roundtables, etc., meetings, but what would be tangible for the Balkans. But any small contribution might be valuable. Therefore, we are preparing the, and I should also underline, not to have this debate in the presidency only, I would say, institution-like. Within the state institution, we like to very much to involve civil society, think tanks, academic fora, media, etc., in these prepared events. So we are planning to have a roundtable with the civil society on the challenges of European Union, which will be dealing in particular with the reconciliation, with the functioning of democratic institutions, rule of law, etc. And the second similar kind of outreach that we want to make is dealing with the education as a form of overcoming the legacy of the past and reinforcing the democratic institution and evolution. And in particular, for the second one, we would, of course, like to use our specific national experience, experience of other countries, our neighbors, those who have the good reputation and some progress made with these areas. And because we think that the education is very much basis of the condition for the stability and economic development for the future, for the young generation. If another young generation would be spoiled by segregation, by lacking the chance of having the free access to society, to the job, it would be to the detriment of those societies. There is evidently many events organized by other ministries of the Czech administration, from industry and trade. I don't think that it is valuable to go through them. Some of them may promote themselves as I see the list of attendees. And I, at this moment, would prefer not to speak about the summit with the Western Balkans, which is too premature for us, even though many people expect this issue and logically as a highlight. I think that it would be enough for the beginning, not to be too long, not to go to details, and I will pass floor back to Anja.
Thank you very much. I think it certainly gave us some insight. I think we are all aware of the ever-changing situation now, also giving the developments in Ukraine, and we're aware that you're not able to give us really concrete details. And I will then pass forward to Žiga Faktor, and I would like.
Okay, I guess I can take it, although we see that that we lost the moderator, but okay, are we back? I can go on. All right.
Yes, please.
Thanks again for the invitation to this discussion and for organizing such an important event. And obviously, I'm very keen to, I need to admit that I haven't read the papers that you were mentioning in the beginning, so I'm very keen to look into those. And thank you also to Mr. Zrzavecký for actually this introduction. I will try to challenge a bit some of the statements, and obviously to also be a bit more concrete when it comes to the expectations, at least from the side of the think tanks, when it comes to actual outcomes of the Czech presidency towards the enlargement policy and specifically towards the Western Balkans. Because the role of the Czech Republic in the support of the region is indisputable. As Mr. Zrzavecký actually mentioned, we have close ties with the countries of the region, culturally, economically, historically, and actually, I would say that both our partners within the EU, but also in the region, are expecting that the Czech presidency will dedicate a lot of its energy to the support of the enlargement process. I would go just to two things that actually Mr. Zrzavecký mentioned. First one, mentioning that actually if the French succeed with the discussions and unblocking of the Bulgarian veto, that we will be left empty hands. I think it's actually the other way around. Then the job really starts, and we have to prepare for intergovernmental conferences with North Macedonia and Albania, and we need to push forward this process as fast as possible. Obviously, the second one is the EU Western Balkans Summit. And I completely understand that the current situation is very challenging. The war in Ukraine turned the whole world upside down, not only the enlargement policy, but at the same time, we should not forget about the countries and the people of the Western Balkans, and the years of efforts that they put into the reforms and the progress. And we cannot now stop because of the crisis in Ukraine. It's actually the other way around. We should understand even more the importance of the progress in the enlargement process, and we should dedicate as much time and energy to support the countries, both in the Western Balkans, but obviously also the associated trio of the Eastern Partnership countries in their path towards either a membership, or obviously when we talk about Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, it is a bit more difficult given the fact that obviously not only the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but also that the countries don't have a full control over their territories. But back to the EU Western Balkans Summit, this should be the crucial point of the whole presidency when we look into the enlargement policy and the support of the Western Balkans. We need to have this high-level political meeting in Prague, ideally during the Czech presidency, because that's the only way we show the support of the process. And obviously, it would also be good if we look back at the declaration from Brdo, from the Slovenian presidency last year, which actually said that the summit will be hosted annually during the presidencies of member states. We also should already look a bit ahead, because there will be Swedish presidency after the Czech, and then also Spanish, and neither of those countries are much keen on the enlargement policy, but also doesn't have really concrete close ties with the Western Balkans. So I think one of the roles of the Czech presidency and its commitment to the support of the integration of the Western Balkan countries is to also, on the EU level, discuss the importance of the closed dialogue with other partners within the EU. So I think there's like these two things that the Czech presidency should really work hard on, and I believe that both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the Government are working on, and I understand that Mr. Zrzavecký cannot be more specific on this, but from the side of think tanks, I really believe those two things are crucial. Obviously, then when we go into some other activities or other initiatives that the Czech presidency could work on, we should be seriously considering the current crisis, war in Ukraine, as a moment when we look deeper into the reconciliation process, as Mr. Zrzavecký mentioned, not only supporting maybe the High Representative Lajčák and within the Czech presidency cooperating with the office of Mr. Lajčák as close as possible to get back the dialogue of Pristina and Belgrade on track, which obviously will be very hard, but we should dedicate energy to this, and also to the current situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So those are two things that the Czech presidency and especially people at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should keep in their mind, ideally maybe deploying a special envoy either for the Western Balkans or maybe a special envoy for the reconciliation process that could travel there and back from the region to Prague, to Brussels, and rejuvenate the dialogues that we are currently having problems with. I'll try to cut myself short, but I think the one specific area where we need to work hard and to change a bit our mindsets is first and foremost to start being honest about the future and the European perspective of the countries of the Western Balkans. Because the approach of the EU in the recent years led to a huge frustration among most of the countries in the Balkans. Obviously, it was due to the French veto at first and to the Bulgarian veto. But when we look in general at the EU levels of approach of the EU member states towards the enlargement policy, we can say that we are actually experiencing kind of a fatigue of the enlargement process, And it is not because of the Western Balkan countries or because of the Western Balkan countries only, it's also because of the approach of the EU member states. So I think the crucial aspect here is really to take the lesson from the war in Ukraine and start being honest among each other and towards the partners in the Western Balkans on what we actually can offer to those countries. So yes, I will be happy to answer afterwards any of the following questions, but I'll try to stop here and leave the space for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Again, I would say very specific points, and I think good points for further discussion, and actually, you know, the focus on reconciliation and the fact that EU should be honest about the future of the Western Balkans is important, because I think the countries have received quite an ambiguous response. You know, the EU proclaiming that they're welcome to, you know, to welcome these countries as part of the EU, but at the same time, not really moving forward with the progress of the countries. Of course, we have to take into account the local political elites who have, you know, proven to maybe take care a little bit more about their own political interests than of their countries, but still. And I've also seen actually that the EU made a visit to Bosnia, specifically it was the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josef, and he visited Sarajevo about 2-3 days ago. And again, he kind of stressed that, you know, the rules for the countries to join the EU have to be followed, that, let's say, there is no exception, which I think is a pretty interesting statement given the current events in Ukraine. And, you know, I would perhaps expect the EU to be more open, or to stress that, you know, the dialogue is still up to, you know, further development. But of course, that is something that we can perhaps discuss after. I would now like to give the floor to Petr, who has also written an article about the Czech EU presidency and has been focusing on it in the past couple of months. And yeah, Petr, if you could give us a little bit more insight from your side. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I have the advantage of being the one speaking as the last one, so a lot of interesting things have been already said, and I can reflect on that. And I also have another advantage of being someone speaking from a more or less independent position of a researcher working on that issue. As you mentioned, I have been recently working on a small research project supported by Kosovo Open Society Fund with an aim to map political position of new Czech political representation towards the region of the Western Balkans, specifically in regard to the upcoming EU presidency. And this gives me some, let's say, freedom to be perhaps a bit more critical or more skeptical at some points, hopefully not too skeptical. As all of you already said, we are going now through very turbulent times, so it's very difficult to provide any comprehensive assessment, analysis, or even prediction in any policy area which is related to the EU, to security policy, and to Czech foreign policy. And exactly expectations from the Czech EU presidency in regard to the region is one of these topics which are currently very difficult to approach and assess. I wrote an article for Balkan Insight a month ago, which means exactly just before the Russian aggression against Ukraine started. And in that article, I raised a few points which I think can be a limiting factors for Czech EU presidency in the Western Balkans. And I read through the article again today. I actually thought it will be outdated because of the events in Ukraine. But in fact, I still think that most of the points which I mentioned and which I elaborated on in the article are still relevant, and possibly even more relevant now, considering what has been going on in the Eastern Europe. So I will just very briefly go through these few points, which do not really provide some clear-cut answers, but these are rather, let's say, feed for thought and points for further discussion, because most of them are, let's say, open-ended questions. So firstly, I focused on the question to what extent is actually the declaratory support of the Czech Republic, Czech government, and Czech EU presidency towards the Western Balkans and its EU integration credible. Because supporting the Western Balkans and its EU integration has been, let's say, a stable priority in the Czech foreign policy over the last 2 decades. And I know that Czech diplomacy was and has been working hard on that, but politically, for quite obvious reasons, this has never been a top priority, which is completely understandable because geopolitical priorities for Czech Republic and Czech government are elsewhere in the East, in the West, but not in the Southeast. So declaring now the Western Balkans to be a priority for Czech EU presidency doesn't really bring some novelty into the Czech foreign policy discourse. And also, it's quite interesting that actually the priority of Western Balkans for the EU presidency was already defined by the previous government. If I remember correctly, it was the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kulhánek, who already announced that there will be the EU Western Balkans Summit in Prague. And I think he even mentioned some very ambitious goals for that summit. So the current political representation, and I'm speaking mainly about political representation, not about diplomacy. The political representation largely inherited this priority for the EU presidency. And we need to see to what extent it will have capacity to materialize this ambition, especially now considering the crisis and war in Ukraine, which will take a lot of attention of both politicians and diplomats, not only in Czech Republic, but on the EU level, of course. So the second point would be the question of some sort of internal political coherence, because even if the Czech political representation would find capacity to move things in the Western Balkans forward, there is a question whether it will also find an internal agreement on that. Because we still should not forget that we have a coalition government. We have 3 offices which are currently responsible for EU affairs. We have Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have the Office of Minister for European Integration, and we have the Office of Prime Minister, Office of Government. Each of these offices is held by different parties, and we should not underestimate the political and ideological differences between these parties in regards to the EU and EU integration. So this is something that could also translate into the agenda setting of the Czech EU presidency. So far, we have been observing quite an unity across these offices and across political representation, which is of course also related to the current crisis in Ukraine, which really requires united position domestically. But another question related to this would be the possible role of President Zeman, who has been well known for his pro-Serbian position in the Western Balkans, very active pro-Serbian position. Now we are, of course, observing a turn in Zeman's political agenda in regards to Russia, but we need to see whether this turn will also be translated in his position towards the Balkans and towards Serbia. Because if not, we can quite easily imagine that he will have some ambition to intervene into the political agenda of the Czech EU presidency on behalf of Serbia, of course, and against possibly other countries in the region which are not in best relations with Serbia. Then the third point, these would be the domestic limits. And the third point would be related to the international limits, because we should be honest in saying that the room to maneuver for the Czech EU presidency is limited. It was limited even before the Ukrainian crisis started. Now it's even more limited. As was already mentioned here quite clearly, the EU integration process of the Western Balkans has stalled for several years. And we see on both sides, on the EU side and on the Western Balkan side, disillusionment, lack of credibility, and lack of confidence. So it will be very difficult for Czech Republic as a medium-sized member state of the EU with not the best reputation on the EU level in sense of being active and constructive to move this stalled process forward. Also, the presidency as institution does not provide much formal powers to the presiding country. And so the impact will largely depend on, let's say, the informal power of agenda setting and lobbying. And of course, in a situation where most of the attention and most of the capacities will be directed towards, let's say, the East, towards Ukraine and solving the Ukrainian crisis, this can be another limit for Czech presidency. What was already mentioned here is the role, and very uncertain role, of the French presidency, because we still don't really know what to expect from France as far as I have been following the developments. French presidency also declared the Western Balkans to be its priority, but Macron actually did it in very ambiguous terms. On one hand, he stated that the region needs to have to be provided a new European perspective, or a new perspective of European integration, but he also admitted that the EU is not ready to absorb new members now. So we still need to see what will actually come up from the French presidency, if there will be this new strategic initiative announced sometime until June, which again depends very much on the course of events in Ukraine, and whether Macron will have capacity to give some attention to the Western Balkans. So now turning to the final point, probably, to not make it too long, and the most important point probably, what can the Czech EU presidency in political terms actually do effectively for the Western Balkans, in the Western Balkans, on the Western Balkans? It is not probable that any breakthrough in the EU integration process will be achieved during the Czech EU presidency. This is, I think, quite clear. But still, the Czech EU presidency and Czech decision makers can and should keep the region high on the agenda. This is something that the presiding country can do and should do, especially now with the war in Ukraine. It will be even more important to keep the attention towards the Western Balkans, towards its European ambitions. And also, even without providing any breakthrough in the process, the Czech presidency should very carefully follow the developments in the region and be prepared and equipped to respond to not only these issues, which are already now destabilizing the region, which is the Kosovo-Serbia dispute, which is the constitutional crisis in Bosnia, which is what was already mentioned, the long waiting for opening accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania, and many other issues. But the Czech diplomacy and Czech politicians should be also ready to respond effectively and proactively to any new escalation of tensions, which can be caused either by the spillover of events from the Eastern Europe, but also it could be caused by the local dynamics. And I'm afraid that the second half of this year will not pass without new escalations, unfortunately, at least not in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We know that the general elections are scheduled for October, and the constitutional crisis, which is already deep enough now, will escalate until then. This is something that can be expected, and the Czech diplomacy and Czech politicians should be ready for that, to respond to this challenge. But also rising tensions in Montenegro, or actually persisting tensions now already, deadlock of Kosovo-Serbia dispute, and many other events would require very careful attention of Czech EU presidency. So I will probably stop here to not be too long and too boring, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petr. I think that was a great overview of, the past presidencies, being the French one, and also of the concrete steps, that the Czech Republic's foreign ministries have tried to do before, and also they will probably try to do in the future. And I will stop here and give the floor, yes, to Mr. Josef Zrzavecký.
Thank you. I wanted only to short correction. Žiga Faktor was completely right to disagree with my expression of empty hand. I had it in mind in the positive way that there is a progress. It would be fantastic if we would not need to deal with the dilemma of whether there is a decoupling or whether is the progress according, as it is said, own merit based. Like Petr Čermák said, we should be realistic, if not pessimistic, how much would be done. But if the first half of this year would not make a progress, certainly the Czech Republic would do the best. Speaking about that the Western Balkan is not the novelty in the Czech foreign policy discourse. Absolutely, it's true. It is for decades. I am dealing with the Western Balkans from the half of 90s, from the wars in Bosnia and Herzegovina and so. And I remember that always we looked to the Southeast Europe with a big attention. This is not only the invention for the presidency. Also to have a little bit of memory of the first Czech Republic presidency of European Union in 2009. I don't know how much of you may do it, and sometimes it is said like that history is happening, because I was been dealing on this. We have been preparing the presidency for 3 years. Then came the crisis in Georgia with the attack of Russia and the occupation of Southern Ossetia. Then the gas crisis, which was at that time considered absolutely terrible. But when you are looking to this from the period perspective of 2022, we could not expect that it would be such a terrible event so close to us. Of course, I do not want to be the advocate of the European Union. But let me say that I slightly disagree with the making the order of the stumbling process of the enlargement is first the problem of European Union and then the problem of the aspiring or candidate countries. Yes, of course, European Union had many problems. Let's remind us at least Brexit, which was 5 years, which were devoted in particular to this, I would say, unnecessary problem. And of course, other hot topics has been a little bit sidelined, including the enlargement. One, if you speak about the reduction of numbers, probably there is not 100% willingness to the further enlargement. What I would say that, but still is important, that these are those reforms. They are conditions sine qua non. Without them, there is the mathematic expression which is saying that it is a condition necessary, but not sufficient. But this is really the necessary condition. What we may, among other, do is that we and it happens sometimes that they are groups of people who understand each other, the friends of enlargement, who have the very same position, who agree on anything. But I would say that very important is to work with those who I would call them the skeptics or realists of the enlargement. They certainly have the reason why they are skeptic. This is not the antagonism towards the Western Balkans. This is that they are looking to the condition with the very detailed look. Returning a little bit into the past, if I remember correctly, that was one of the Western countries, the Netherlands, who has been very much paying attention to the human rights and the issue of war and after-war period before the enlargement of Croatia. And Croatia had to persuade even those skeptic or realistic countries that they has been fulfilling the conditions. And this is applying even in 2002. I do not want to be too long, and that is what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much for the reactions and for bringing valid points again, because I think it's important to stress that we should not be only critical to the EU, but also we should take a realistic look at the progress that the countries have made or have not made and are willing to make towards the EU membership. And I will give the floor to Žiga Faktor, who would like to react.
Just very briefly to react actually also on what Mr. Zrzavecký now mentioned. Yes, I agree with the fact that obviously it is not only about the EU, but it is in our hand what from our side we can do. And if nothing else, and if there is no progress, speaking about the situation in Serbia, we need to address it openly and not tapping the shoulder of an autocrat that is basically ruining the future of its own country for the decades to come. So we need to speak up to that, and we need to openly address that. And we could put more attention to the progress reports on the Western Balkan countries. That is one thing that, you know, the Commission comes up each year, and it has basically no attention within the Western Balkan countries. I guess there's you know, big potential to highlight these progress reports, and maybe when looking at the Czech Republic specifically, and having in mind that we have Commissioner Věra Jourová from the Czech Republic, we could maybe include the Western Balkan countries in the rule of law reports that are being commissioned each year for the member states, and to include the Western Balkan countries as much as possible in as many initiatives as possible. And let's say, speaking about the Czech presidency, maybe also including the Western Balkan prime ministers, foreign ministers in informal meetings during the presidency at Gymnich and so on. Because I think this inclusion is one thing that really, you know, lacks so far. And obviously there's a lot of problems on the side of the Western Balkan countries, but we should try to be proactive in this sense.
Thank you. And I can see Petr with a hand up, so I'm going to give you the space.
Yeah, just a very brief comment on what Mr. Zrzavecký said in regard to where are actually the sources of the stalemate of the integration process. And I fully agree that we need to identify the sources on both sides, in the EU and in the Western Balkans, of course, primarily in the Western Balkans, because these are the countries which are applying and which need to fulfill the criteria. And I think the criteria are formally set quite clearly. But what should the EU avoid doing is to politicizing the process even more. And now I will be very specific. What we have seen in Kosovo, let's say our last few years, is the situation that Kosovo met the criteria for visa liberalization, but it was not granted the outcome. And the situation with Albania and North Macedonia is quite similar, I'm afraid. Criteria were fulfilled, but accession talks were not open. So these are the, let's say, small or minor things which are making the process less credible for the Western Balkan states. And I can fully understand the frustration of local political elites then.
Thank you, Petr. I would now move to the audience. I can see two questions actually. So I would go with the first one from Amir Shaban. And the question is, what concrete results does the Czech EU presidency want to achieve? We've already kind of touched upon that question, but I would like to anyway ask you again if you maybe have some other additions to that. Any comment? Okay, I take that as a no. And then we have a, sorry, yes, please, you can go. Mr. Zrzavecký. You are on mute.
Sorry. Perhaps this is a question to me. I have to repeat what I said at the beginning, that I am not in the official position to say there's something. I would say this is nothing is agreed at this moment. But what are the aims? Aims would be relatively good, relatively well defined. Maximum of intergovernmental conference with those who are negotiating, and opening the accession process with those who are standing behind doors are prepared. And there is some kind of the stumbling block we have been touching to this, and it is meant in particular to the Northern Macedonia and Albania. If the issue of Bulgaria and Northern Macedonia would go in positive way, there are some indication that it might be so, but nothing is certain. And the third of its aim is the implementation of the new methodology, which has been implemented for something than a year. So the aims could be repeated like that. But overall of this is the progress towards the European Union by fulfilling the reforms. For example, Petr Čermák mentioned very correctly that there are some concerns which are very previsible, that there will be not only the going to the positive direction, but we may be afraid of the negative one. And in this, I would also only repeat.
Thank you. And before I move to the other questions, would anyone else like to react? Okay, so we have another question from Gergi Kajana asking if realistically there is any chance to resolve the Skopje-Sofia standoff in the near future, and will Prague's presidency address the issue by speaking to both capitals on the matter, or rather address some kind of mutually accepted agreement?
Maybe I can take this one at the beginning. There are certainly a lot of hopes, actually, from the information I have. Also, French presidency, as Mr. Zrzavecký was mentioning, is putting a lot of energy into it, or was preparing to put a lot of energy into it before the escalation of war in Ukraine. Still, the French presidency plans to host a conference in June, and there they should announce this unblocking if everything goes well, of course. If not, obviously, I think the most important is that we have actually new government in Sofia, finally. The government seems more proactive and more open to discuss the issue. But again, we need to also keep in mind that there are some identity issues that the Macedonian people just cannot accept. And there is obviously an exact question to be made whether we should either as a Czech presidency or on the EU level, discuss this not on the bilateral, direction between Skopje and Sofia only, but also to engage more as the presidency, either the French one ongoing or the Czech one that is coming up. But I really believe that actually this issue can be solved. The question is, what would actually the Czech presidency be doing if the issue is not resolved, and whether we would be considering possible decoupling of Albania and North Macedonia to open the accession process, at least for Albania. But that's, again, a question more to the political elites than to us.
May I just comment on it? I'm happy to hear that Žiga actually has some good news in that regard, but I will be again a bit more skeptical. I was in Pristina this weekend. I had a chance to talk to people to policy analysts from Skopje. I asked them about their expectations for the upcoming months for the French presidency and for Czech presidency, and whether they expect that accession talks could be opened this year. And they were very skeptical. Even after the change of government in Bulgaria, they do not expect much, especially now. Again, I'm coming back with the war in Ukraine. Most of the attention, political attention, will go there. And this is a political question. This is not administrative or formal question, because formally criteria were fulfilled. Now we need to find political agreement on the EU level. And I'm afraid it will be difficult now in upcoming weeks. Even finding the agreement, there will be lack of capacity for that. But hopefully Žiga will be right and I will.
So that's also a difference of the perspective. See, you were in Pristina. I was actually talking with French people here in Brussels. So, also different information. But I certainly hope that, I'm not saying that the situation will be solved, but that the Bulgarians will be open to unblock and obviously then continue the negotiations with the Macedonian counterparts. But we'll see about the real outcomes.
Thank you both for the perspectives and reaction to the question. I will now move on to another question from Veronika Grosová. And this is, again, maybe more directed to you, to Žiga and Petr. And she's asking whether, apart from the general political lobbying that we see in the enlargement, if there's perhaps any specific deliverables that could be done during the Czech presidency in support of the Western Balkan countries to show them concrete support for the enlargement process. Thank you.
Okay, I may start. Actually, I don't have a clear answer for that. It is a difficult question, and I'm not probably the right person who should identify that these opportunities. But what I think could be important politically would be the summit in Prague, of course. Inviting the leaders from the region, all of them preferably, to Prague, having them here for a few days, even if it's just symbolical, let's say, politically, it can make a lot, because it can open some space for negotiations. And we will see if this could be the Kosovo-Serbia dispute, where even a small step forward would be a big success after these years of stagnation. So bringing regional leaders to table, mediate between them, and try to achieve even small steps forward could be one of these deliverables, I guess.
I must agree with Petr, and actually looking at it from the other way around, not having a summit, EU Western Balkans summit in Prague, would be just a confirmation towards the Western Balkan countries that the issue of enlargement and the perspective of their European path is not sincere and not open. Because last year during the Slovene presidency, all of the EU representatives actually agreed upon hosting this annually. So it really puts a lot of pressure on the Czech presidency. And I believe it needs to be the concrete step. Obviously, then I think when we look into the intergovernmental conferences, although the political situation in Montenegro is very difficult currently, Montenegro is still the country that opened the most chapters and could potentially, with some support and focus, even close some of those. Petr?
Yeah, just one more idea that came to my mind in regard to what can be delivered effectively. I think we don't need to focus on the big issues, on these highly politicized issues of mutual relations and Kosovo-Serbia dispute dialogue. But as Mr. Zrzavecký mentioned, there will be many smaller initiatives and meetings in the sectoral issues. And I think there, in areas which are not so politicized, also the Czech presidency can bring some progress. For example, in the sphere of energy transition and climate policies, I assume that this should be also one of the priorities, general priorities for the Czech presidency. And if this priority is also linked to the Western Balkans, I think that the Czech Republic can actually move the region at least a bit forward in its energy transition by sharing its experience and by communicating with local stakeholders. So I think that these specific issues should not be underestimated and should not be overshadowed by the big political issues, which are more difficult to solve.
Thank you to both. I will move to another question, this time touching the Kosovo topic. So we have a question from Naim Ziberai asking if Kosovo is not getting visa liberalization from the EU, even after all these years and all the criteria is fulfilled. Asking then why should Kosovo cooperate with the EU and apply to become the EU member state? Thank you for that question. Would anyone like to go first and
address
it?
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll try. I need to say Kosovo is not a country that I focus most on, but I will try to be very Brussels-centric and say that it is not only about the goal, but also about the path. And that also just committing to the reforms, to the democratic consolidation in the country, to the reforms connected to the rule of law in the country, but also, let's say, economic ones, will make the country better to live in. If we talk about one of the huge problems of the Western Balkan countries, it's the problem of mass migration. Youth basically leaving the region because there is no potential, for their, growth and good well-being. And I think if nothing else, and I really hope there's much more to it, and that visa liberalization will be open for Kosovo. But even if there's nothing else, I think that committing to those reforms will make the country better to live in, and not only, a member or a candidate.
Thank you for those points. Anyone else?
Well, I will just have a brief answer, let's say, direct question, direct answer. I can fully understand the frustration of society in Kosovo by the fact that the visa liberalization has not been granted to them. But if the question is, why should Kosovo cooperate with EU? I think that the answer is because there is no alternative, despite all these problems. Politically speaking, Kosovo is now oriented towards the EU. And of course, there is the US as the main ally, political ally of Kosovo. But the US cannot really provide Kosovo these opportunities economically that the EU can. That would be it.
Thank you, Petr, for the brief reaction. Of course, yes.
If I may add to this very shortly, I would say that the most exact and the best answer, provided that it is true, is that if politicians of accession countries say and confirm that they are not pursuing reforms because of European Union, but because of their own countries, because they need the democratization, they need to improve the system of judicial, the fight with the corruption, etc., which is all the portion of the accession towards European Union. But the functioning, modern democratic society needs that even without the membership. Of course, membership of EU provides the many benefits. It is valuable. It would be very good if the all democratic Europe would be united. But there are these conditions about which we are still turning around.
Thank you, all of you. And now we have a question following that from Bojana Zoric, also asking about the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. And she says that we all know that the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue represents a serious obstacle to any reconciliation in the region and the advancement of the Western Balkans' future towards the EU. And she's asking what would be the Czech presidency's stance and possible moves towards this issue, regarding the issue. So what can actually the Czech Republic do to perhaps help to resolve the issue? Thank you.
Okay, I will try. I actually already mentioned that I would not expect any big progress on that issue, but bringing Kurti and Vučić to the table, for example, in Prague during the EU summit, could make at least some difference. But because the situation now is really bad in the sense of lack of interest of both sides, I think, in really moving forward the dialogue. Because as far as I know, the current Kurtis government is not much interested in let's say, bringing a big progress in that. Vučić, at least until the elections, probably would also not be really interested. So we will see how the elections will end up, what will be Vučić's position, how strong it will be. But maybe that could provide some sort of opportunity to at least return back to the negotiating table.
Thank you, Petr. And if there are no other reactions, I will go to another question, this time from Sabina Rehusová, and she is asking if the Czech Republic presidency closely following the current step of Mr. Vučić, meaning hesitation of joining the sanctions against Russia, taking the time to address the EU after the meetings with high representatives of EU and dealing with domestic issues Serbia is facing now, for example, the environmental topics. Would these issues affect Serbia's future in the EU? Thank you for that question. And again, I will give the floor to the panelist.
If I say very shortly, the answer is yes. We are following what is going on in Serbia. Less than months, or in fact about 2.5 weeks before the elections. The issue is what are the alternatives in Serbia? What is the pre-election stance? What is the result of the big force on Vučić from the side of the European partners? What is the opportunism of the moment? What is the really political stance? They are not going to leave Russia, which is very regrettable. And after 3 weeks, we might be a little bit more inside. He'll be disponible to change some of this position, or whether he returns to the fact that he would have secured another 5 years in office.
Thank you.
If I may just add up to it a little bit, to just talk about Vučić a little bit more, because he's a very interesting person, obviously. When you look at what or how Serbia was reacting to the Russian aggression, I mean, there's obviously no surprise from the people that are following the region. No one was even closely surprised. And again, it showed with actually Serbia supporting the UN resolution that Vučić is still trying to play both cards. Obviously, there will be important elections coming up, but it is time to address this non-compliance, non-alineation with the common security and foreign policy of the EU, because this is one of the major issues of Serbia on its European path. The question is obviously whether this walk towards the membership in the EU is actually sincere from the Serbian side. But nevertheless, we should keep close eye also on the elections when we look at the Serbian minority in Kosovo, to be very cautious about not escalating the things there. And obviously, one thing not to forget is why, I mean, among all the other reasons why Vučić is playing this Russian, potentially Chinese card, is the veto power at the Security Council of the United Nations. And this is one of the reasons why Serbia will always try to balance due to the situation of Kosovo. Because if they have Russia or potentially China on their side to block any potential resolution of Kosovo, then obviously, it's their veto in their hands, basically. So we shouldn't just think about why Vučić is not, supporting the sanctions and why does he have friendly relationship with Russia. We should also, always link it with Kosovo and potentially with the veto power in the Security Council of the UN.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing the context into the whole situation, because I think that's very important, especially when it comes to the Western Balkans. Anyone else would like to react to this question? I will give you a couple of last seconds. before, I don't see any new questions. So I think we could slowly start to end the debate. I would like to thank everyone again for joining, for all the great panelists, for their contributions, and for actually very lively discussion. I'm happy to see that the attendees have been active, and there's been also a nice cooperation and activity from the panelist side. So thank you again. And also, just for you to know, this session has been recorded. So if you would like to kind of go back to it later or share it with whomever you like, that would be possible. So thank you again, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, and nice evening to all of you.
I would finish with the most important message of these days, if I may. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you.